So habitat degradation is the next kind of category within changes to habitat or habitat loss. And this is considered moderate disturbances that don't destroy the habitat but make it less suitable for a species. So there's kind of a functional loss of habitat, or it's not functioning as well for the survival or reproduction of a species. And so that's habitat degradation. It could be from something like grazing, it could be a change in fire regime. Um, some disturbance is very good and necessary in some ecosystems to maintain them. These are disturbances that change the way the ecosystem functions or makes it not useful as habitat for a particular species. Habitat degradation, one of the things it does is changing the carrying capacity. Because the ecosystem isn't functioning as well, it may not have as much food or the right kind of microclimate or the right kind of cover for a species. So we talked about carrying capacity before. It's the maximum population size supported by a particular habitat. It often has to do with some kind of resource. It could be prey, it could be places to hibernate, things like that. So we see here a depiction of carrying capacity. So this kind of flat area of the population size through time, that would be the carrying capacity. So that's often called K. And then if a population or a habitat is degraded, the population might look more like this second line, this blue line, and we get a second K. And so we see that the amount of individuals that ecosystem or habitat can support is much smaller for the degraded habitat. There's probably not as much food, there's not as many suitable conditions in general because of the degradation of that habitat. So now I want to talk about a few different types of habitat degradation. In marine systems, one type is trawling. So the marine system is, or the marine habitat is still there. The bottom of the ocean is still there, but it doesn't function anything like it used to. And so trawling is a type of fishing that you can see kind of in this cartoon here, where a net is dragged along by a boat, but the net has weights on it such that the net goes all the way to the bottom and it plows through and basically destroys any structure that's rooted to the bottom of that marine ecosystem. So you can see here, this is a picture of a benthic habitat or the bottom habitat in a marine system. And you can see that there are different structures, different kinds of corals or algae, or you could have seagrasses that are growing on the bottom there. And after a trawling net came through, everything is pretty much flattened. So trawling just flattens and picks up anything in that net's path. Another common type of habitat degradation is pollution. And pollution is sometimes a hard word to talk about because it includes a lot of different things, and we often use the word pollution for putting anything in the environment that doesn't belong there. And it doesn't have to be a thing. It could be noise or light, and we'll talk briefly about noise pollution, light pollution later on. And so these are pictures of things that we think of. We think of pipes with some kind of dirty water coming out as causing water pollution. We think of the water turning bright green from too many nutrients in the water. And we think of smokestacks putting contaminants into the air. And so these are all examples of pollution, but there are other things as well. So pollution affects air quality, water quality, global climate. It can also affect soil quality. The Environmental Protection Agency defines it as something that must adversely affect human health. So if it only affects animals or plants, the Environmental Protection Agency doesn't include it as pollution. And for a little while, and we'll see what happens as we have the administrations change here in next month. We'll see what happens, but for a little while under the Obama administration, contaminants that cause climate change were included under the EPA's definition of pollution. So things like carbon dioxide, because there's a lot of evidence to show that climate change will adversely affect human health. So that was the reason that they were able to include that, even though breathing in carbon dioxide outside in the air isn't necessarily harmful. So here's a list of different examples. Pesticides, which could include things like herbicides and insecticides. Heavy metals, a lot of times we're talking about things like mercury and lead, but there are some other ones. Nutrients in water are big sources of pollution, and we'll spend some time talking about that. There's a lot of different types of air pollutants. And then there are some other things that some of you may not have ever heard of being called pollution, like noise pollution, light pollution, and thermal pollution. So pollution affects biodiversity in two main ways, and actually lots of threats affect things in two main ways. So one are the direct effects, and the second ones are indirect effects. So direct effects for pollution include when some sort of contaminant or pollutant kills or harms a species directly. They are exposed to whatever this pollutant or contaminant is, and it makes their body not work as well. And that could reduce survival, that could reduce reproduction, it might reduce their ability to move or other kinds of things. But that chemical is interacting with an organism's body, and that's causing harm. Indirect effects are when pollutants kill or reduce survival or reproduction of organisms through some indirect pathway. So that might be that the pollutant kills your prey items and then there's not anything to eat because your prey was killed by some contaminant. It could be that a contaminant messed up something with your habitat. So if you're an animal and you require certain types of plants, if that contaminant harms those plants, then you might not have cover to hide from predators, or you might not have food or shelter or things like that. Those are just some examples.